Hi, everybody. It's May the 6th, and we've successfully gotten through Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. Um, so can we just do a brief introductions of names and where you're seated at the moment? Anything more that you want to add um, in popcorn order? Just a name and a location.
My name is Donna Smith, and I'm calling from Cherry Hill, New Jersey.
Oh, almost a neighbor. I'm in Ardmore, the main line. Okay. Welcome.
I'm Grace Schuler. I live in Lansdowne. I've been a Zechariah Sitchin fan for at least 20 years. I never traveled with him, but I attended many of his seminars. I've introduced him at the Free Library of Philadelphia. I've sat next to him at dinners. I've visited him in New York City. And I've read most of his books, at least about 9 or 10 of the original series of his books. And I was thrilled to find out that Mike was carrying on and actually going a step further in interpreting the works of Sitchin. And so I'm very excited to be here. I haven't followed Sitchin recently, but I have been watching Ancient Aliens. And the most intriguing shows I've seen lately are the ones that talk about the handbag that's in all the statues, the Anunnaki statues, the Mexican statues, the Egyptian statues, all these godlike people are holding a little handbag, which Sitchin referred to as the Mies. I'm not sure if it's me or May. In Ancient Aliens, they pronounce the M-E word, May, which is the equivalent to our cell phones. And with the maze, you can start a civilization anywhere. So I'm very intrigued with that aspect. And the other part I'm intrigued with is the fact that there have been found spheres, large granite and other stone spheres all over the world. I used to think they were just in Costa Rica, but they're all over the world, including the ocean, covered with pyrite, gold, so that they glow in the dark underwater. So there are lots and lots of subjects that I'm so intrigued with that I think require further discussion and research. And so I'm happy to learn from all of you.
Well, but confirmation keeps coming. Cecily, you want to introduce yourself and say where you are?
Yeah, hi. My name's Cecily Marchese. I live on Honeymoon Island in Florida. It's magnificent here. Anybody who wants to visit, please come. I've traveled the planet with Zechariah Sitchin and met his wife, Rena, and being that I lived in New York City, they did too. So we became very good friends and we would go out together all the time. It was lovely. And I've constantly carried on trying to understand everything about the ancient aliens and have enjoyed it very much. I love it and I'll never stop. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Next introduction from who?
I'll go. My name is Paula Berzanski. I'm in Reisterstown, Maryland, and I'm a Mike follower. Been following Mike and his work for 20 plus years.
Jim?
Yeah, I'm Jim Silverthorne in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. That's Northeast Pennsylvania. And I've known Mike for a long time. I've forgotten how long. And well, he was a lot younger. Let's just say that. And he looked very handsome then.
Thank you. What about now?
That's to be discussed.
Okay.
And I conduct recently, more recently, research into what appears to power homeopathic medicine.
Uh-huh. Jim, I think it was 19 1967,
65,
68. Yeah,
68,
maybe it's 68, yeah.
67.
Linda?
So sorry, I was a little late.
Didn't miss anything much.
But we're introducing ourselves, aren't we?
Yeah.
My name's Linda Gooding. I am in Atlanta, Georgia. And I am a retired biomedical scientist. I've had an almost lifelong interest my interest came when I was in graduate school and I discovered Velikovsky. And what was interesting to me was the total sanity of looking at what the ancients said happened in the world and trying to make something of it like it was real, which to me seemed completely reasonable. and actually got into a long and sustained argument with another young faculty at the time when I was a graduate student named Carl Sagan. So I've had an interest in this stuff for a very long time. This is when we were at Cornell. And I stumbled onto Mike and have become somewhat of a Mike follower myself.
Thank you. An interesting thing about, it's hey, it's real, that with particular to Velikovsky, and that is he was trained as a psychoanalyst. And what he said was when he was reading some of these accounts of things that couldn't have happened, like the sun stopped in the sky, for a day, absolutely impossible. But what he said was like reading between the lines, there was a sense of reality, that like these were eyewitnesses talking, that they were not just repeating a myth.
And it was recorded on two sides of the earth. The Chinese recorded
That too,
it,
but he was
North America.
absolutely. But he was, but just what he didn't know that, at the time. But what he was just reading between the lines like a good psychoanalyst should do. Okay. Let's see, Jane, tell us something.
Hey there, this is Jane Beringer. I'm calling in from Berwyn, Pennsylvania, which is I'm probably the closest to Mike in Ardmore. So I've got
Yes.
that going for me. I'm a Sitchin novice compared to most of you, and a Mike follower, and happy to be part of the group.
And what did you used to do?
My training is in biomedical engineering. And at the moment, I call myself, though, a scientist turned artist.
Okay. The rules are very loose. Speak up or wave your hand. I'm not going to watch the chat window, so feel free to break in and just talk or wave your real hand, not the graphic one. So here's a starting place about, and just to keep our language clear, because it's easy to get confused sometimes. Nibiru, the translation being close to the planet that crosses. Recently known to amateur astronomy buffs as Planet X, which is pretty cute because the X, you turn it 45 degrees and you get one of the ancient signs from Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. It was the 12th planet to, well, Sitchin, but he was repeating what the Mesopotamians said. 12 being, from Mercury to Neptune, you have 8. And then you add Pluto, which was a planet as far as the Mesopotamians were concerned. Plus the moon and the sun, which in spiritual terms and in astrology, they are planets of a different sort in the system. And then the Nibiru and add them all, you get 12. Recently, we hear about the 9th planet, and that's because Mercury to Neptune is 8. They ignore Pluto, and then you add this unknown planet way out there, and that's now the 9th planet. So, the terminology is fluid. Okay. And the significance of the 12, the Sumerians and Sitchin noted this, is that there were 12 signs of the zodiac. The circle in the sky is pretty evenly divided amongst the 12 signs. And that was the basis for the Anunnaki creating a ruling circle of 12 highest gods. And in memory, so to speak, in unconscious memory of the 12 gods, we have 12 all over the place in our world. But we'll get into that. Everything from a dozen roses to the members of a jury, to the months in the year, to hours on the clock, and everything else.
12 tribes of Israel.
Yes, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 sons of Ishmael, Abraham's other son, 12 apostles. Okay.
Right.
12 inches in a foot. Matter of fact, the children's book that I'm writing to accompany the release of the movie is a brother and sister discover all the 12s in the world. Like, what's going on here? Nobody's going to explain it. You can explain this to us. So it's kind of a mystery. Reeve, you want to say hello? I think he's muted. No, it's not. Well, anyway, that's Reeve. He's in Rockville, Maryland. Okay.
Any relation?
No, not that we know of. And there's a really funny story. We did not come together by chance. So I had an office in a building that was mostly a small medical building. Down at the end of the hall, and on the door it said, Myron Brenner, may have said psychiatry, I'm not sure, and the office next to mine became vacant, and then all of a sudden on the door appeared Rabbi Reeve Brenner, pastoral counseling. So we were playing, we were working two sides of the street.
That's funny.
Not by chance. So as you may know, in bits and pieces, data keeps coming in to point to the existence of a large planet that's not been spotted yet, way out in space, that's a member of the system. Most recently, I think Linda sent me this, a Dr. Betsy Jin submitted an article in just this last April, which was somewhat supportive. The evidence is mostly the gravitational signature, the way in which a body who has not been seen is affecting the motion of bodies in the outermost solar system, which, by the way, was how Pluto was discovered, because it was affecting the orbit of Uranus. The fact that there is something out there is I would say mildly supportive of our hypothesis. Okay, what is going to tip the scales in the way of like, this is incontrovertible, is when it's actually spotted. Because when it is, and you heard it here first, I predict, okay? They're gonna find that the record, the Mesopotamian record, is confirmed. It has a period of 3,600 years that is currently below the plane of the ecliptic. It crosses that plane through the orbits of the asteroids. Okay, and it's highly reflective and gold in color. All of those, that's gonna nail it. But I don't know. We don't know how long it's going to be until it's spotted. Okay. In the movie, it's spotted in the year 2050, but I'd like to see it happening a little sooner, personally.
Mike,
Yes.
golden color, highly reflective, might it be thought of as a second sun?
It wouldn't be that bright because since
Oh.
it's reflective and it's very far from light sources, it's not going to be really brilliant. It was a second sun when it approached closely to the Earth, and it rivaled the sun in brightness, and that's why it was considered the ruler of the solar system. Anyway, it's nice that they're looking for it. I've speculated, well, maybe I could get some astronomic team to spend a few minutes, using the orbital parameters from the Mesopotamian tablets to focus their search, but I don't, I don't think I have a chance of getting anybody. Yes, Linda.
Well, Mike, one of those articles mentioned that there's some new telescope coming online and that they can make some pretty good predictions about where it might be.
Well, that certainly the better the technology gets, the more likely the discovery is. Up until recently, there were about 4 competing theories as to what kind of body it is and where it is, and that's partly because they're thinking of it as something that's in a rather stable circular orbit. And because some of the effects on the outer bodies in the system are the results of it passing very close every 3,600 years, so it is, for those bodies, it appears to be much more massive if the thinking is that it stays far away. So, there were again, I think about 4 different theories about what sort of body it is. Okay. Any more thoughts about this? So I have a related astronomical matter, but it's a bit of a stretch to think of why it's really important. And I'd say why it's important is the fact that the universe is not really explosively expanding, but is really driven, if that's not quite the right word, but is really embraced and moved by a fluid medium, okay, the field, okay, gone by many names, why that's related to trauma being transmitted across the ages and being transmitted energetically from the Anunnaki, who were a traumatized species, to humans, how that's connected. I'll try to draw it together. But most recently, another piece of the Big Bang falling apart. Most recently was a group at Hopkins, where there's a Space Telescope Institute. They're finding flaws in the theory of dark matter, the current theory of dark matter, which is thought to be driving, accelerating the expansion. The dark matter is doing that. That's just one of the ways in which the Big Bang theory is coming apart. Another way, what I think I mentioned when we last met 2 months ago, at the very, very edges, the furthest we can see in the universe, those are the elements that were most energetically exploded out of the Big Bang. They moved the fastest. That's why they're way out there, and they are the products, of creation in the first, infinitesimally small moments of time. And what's found recently is way out there at the very edge, okay, from the exact, instant of creation, there are spiral galaxies, which take billions of years to form. So how can something that's billions of years old have originated, in a micro, I don't know how, the nanoseconds. So anyway, if the Big Bang didn't happen, the only alternate explanation is that there is a mass-free medium that is transmitting light the same way that air and water and bone transmits sound, and that medium is absorbing energy in a little bit of a way, and that's explains the so-called redshift. What that means is that the field is real. God is real. Okay? And the field of the species is real. That's the medium that conducts memory, in addition to the obvious and more ordinary ways of conducting memory through stories and laws and customs, but memory is also transmitted through the field. So it makes it a little bit easier to understand how perfectly we keep reproducing, reenacting our experience from tens of thousands of years ago. That in addition to the more obvious means of transmission, that we're living in the field, which is largely timeless. Okay, so so I guess my point is really that a dominant paradigm really unites, embraces seemingly independent natural functions, things that don't seem to be connected, like psychic experiences, which can all be explained by the existence of the field, and the redshift in the distant galaxies. That paradigms uniting what seem to be different aspects of existence, like the Aristotelian paradigm united many things, and it collapsed all at once. The same thing seems to be in the offing now, that the dominant paradigm is going to crash. Einstein wrote in a letter, it's somewhere in the archives, but I'd love to find where it is. He wrote to a colleague that if the ether does exist, if the experiments in the 1920s by a physicist named Dayton Miller, if those really are free of error, and he found evidence for a moving ether, he said that we have to reconsider relativity. It falls apart, So a whole lot falls apart all at once. But that's and we're living in an age, and I'm going to jump ahead to a book I'm reading recently, but we're living in an age where a whole lot of things in different realms are changing in a revolutionary way all at the same time. Come on to that in a bit. Pause. And then go on to something which I took a good look at, thanks to Linda. So first, a bit of chronology, a bit of review of what we know, what we're pretty sure that we know. So the first inland cities, is just a time marker, built by the Anunnaki, go back to around 400,000 years ago. The mutiny of the miners, followed by the authorization by the king of Nibiru to craft a mixed servant race, that's around 310,000 years ago. Now, the oldest Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, the Neanderthal man, the oldest fossils go back 250,000 years ago. So there's a gap of 60,000 years between the Neanderthals, which I tend to think of as the last work in progress life form that the Anunnaki were developing, and Enki and Ninmah were developing. And then the oldest Homo sapiens sapiens fossils go back 150,000 years ago. So it's another 100,000 year gap. So we got to pause there a bit to say, well, what does that mean? Those gaps, apparent gaps of 60,000 and 100,000 years, because the tablets accounts make it sound like it. Yeah, there was some work involved and they made mistakes and they had to go back and do it all over again, but it doesn't sound like it took all that much time. Okay. So we have to reconcile how we read the record, that's written, and how we read the record in the fossils. Okay? There's got to be some way to resolve the disparity. And what I'm thinking of is that there's two things. One is that the story had to be dumbed down enough that the humans who were reading and transmitting it could grasp it. It's hard to do it now. We have to stretch our scientific minds a bit, to take on, to think about long lifespans that are indicated in the tablets. So how could people in a pre-scientific time make sense of lifespan, not just lifespans, but of the gods who were doing the work, but also the process itself, the in vivo and in vitro, aspects of the work. People could not have grasped the spans. So to make it read like, A, B, C, D, not all that long, was a way of making it understandable. In other words, dumbing it down, translating it into the limited human minds. Another thing is that before the Greeks, before guys like Herodotus, there was no objective history as we understand it. What was written about what happened was an account of the essence of the events. In other words, it wasn't history in our terms. It was a revelation of truth. They wanted to get across what was really essential, what was true. And so they weren't too much concerned with some of the little details, like how many years it took for something to happen. So that makes it, I think it makes it a lot easier to put the two stories together, the fossil story, and the cuneiform story in the tablets. So moving on, there's consensus that the first migration out of Africa. Did I just get fuzzy on everybody's screen? I got fuzzy.
Yes, you're fuzzy.
Yeah. Well, I'll try to keep my thinking sharp, but I must have done something with the camera. There we go. See, I had to
Yep.
train the camera. My camera can learn. All right. Consensus is that 70,000 years ago, that was the first migration from Africa to Europe, and obviously passing through the Levant, passing through the Middle East. And these were small, dark-skinned hunter-gatherers. Then the next marking point is on basis of genetic evidence that Homo sapiens and Homo sapiens neanderthalensis interbred. The earliest indications are around 52,000 years ago. Then, around 45,000 years ago, there's a second migration into Europe. And these are farmers, taller, lighter skinned, clearly coming from the Middle East with skills developed under Anunnaki tutelage, which the first escapees, you might say, from Africa did not have. What's come to light, and two scientists at the University of Padua, Pagani and Valini, doing DNA studies from populations, and I'm not sure how much this is from grave sites, and archaeologic discoveries, and how much is current populations. That wasn't clear to me. I didn't read the article deeply enough. That they found that there was a static hub of humanity for around 20,000 years. And that's the gap between the first migration, approximate gap, between the first migration out of Africa and the second migration into Europe. It's like, wow. Now, their studies are from the Persian Plateau, which is the highlands to the north and northwest and northeast of Mesopotamia. And so that's not solidly confirming a Mesopotamian civilization, for an extended period of time, that then launched migrations into around the world. But that kind of makes sense because Mesopotamia, Iraq now, was really been messed up over time. There was the flood, which emptied the whole place, and then there was the nuclear devastation. So the flood, one of the times, but anyway, I guess we don't need the times. So there's the flood. Then there's devastation of the nuclear fallout from the war in the Sinai. So populations keep coming in, then the Turks, you know. So DNA studies would be much, much harder to do on populations in Mesopotamia than in the Persian Plateau, which is a much more stable place. Not as far as we know, not too much in and out migration from there. So they are an accessible population for study, and there may never be one in present day Iraq. Maybe there will be, but so I'm not troubled by the fact that they located this static hub of humanity for 20,000 years, you know, in Persia rather than in Mesopotamia. Actually, the two regions did interact a good deal. There's a number of points at which they in the tablets, and a number of points in which they interacted. A little bit of a well, the picture of the human migrations, you know, is who knows how long it's going to take once it's understood that there was this chromosomal intrusion, you know, and the launching of a hybrid species, us, you know. Once that's understood, becomes and that the crafting happened in Africa and southeastern Africa, and that there were later naturalistic hybridizations through mating in the Middle East. Once that's understood, then it'll be a lot easier to begin to sort out this very, very complex picture of how humans moved around. Okay, because the movement was going from very early. And the oldest cave art is found around 40,000 years ago in Europe, but also in Indonesia at the same time. And a little piece, you know, the pieces of this migration puzzle are starting to come together. Just discovered were in northwest Arabia, not all that far from Mesopotamia, lava tubes, caves in volcanic material that were inhabited by people and their animals around 10,000 years ago. Little bits and pieces are going to come together to help to understand how we spread out. Right now, it's a hodgepodge, and you know, nobody can really make terribly good sense of it. The data bits don't all make a coherent jigsaw puzzle. Now here's an interesting piece. In Australia, there are many unique mammals, as you know, and a number of them are seriously endangered by climate change. So what genetic scientists are attempting to do is to give them traits that are going to make them more adaptive to the changing circumstances. So they're doing some interbreeding, but they're also doing some gene editing to endow them with new traits. The point is that the more of this that goes on, the more that we uh, advanced technically and conceptually, with CRISPR and with other tools, the easier it becomes to accept what Enki and Ninmah claim to have done. Okay? So, because 50 to maybe 75 years ago, reading those accounts, you know, if a scientifically educated person could sit still long enough to actually read those accounts, you know, they'd say that's absolutely impossible. They can't do that, you know. Now the same person, again, if you can get him or her to sit still long enough to read it, will say, well, you know, it's not that far a stretch from what we can do today or maybe next year. So that's what we're doing is helping, without intending to, we're helping to support the theory of diverted evolution. Okay. While you're digesting that,
Mike, just to add a thought on these migrations, how many of the Anunnaki leaders do you think might have led the migrations, such as Enki, who was good at metallurgy and agriculture? Supposedly, he went to South America and did established mining and weaving, and may have built the mining establishment in Mexico at the Teotihuacan. Could you comment on that idea?
well, the Anunnaki clearly moved around the world and built things and did things. I think before they crafted humans and after they crafted humans, both. I'm not sure about where in the records it suggests that Enki himself may have traveled, but one of his sons seems to have been important in the origins of Aztec civilization and or the earlier ones, the Olmecs. If you remember those great stone heads, Olmecs, they're African, and the domain of that son, Gibil, Gibril or Gibil, was in Africa, and he was clearly involved with the gold production because his name translates to burns earth or smelting, smelter, and he may be actually reproduced in one of the Mexican gods. I'm not sure which one, but so yeah, I think it was clearly Anunnaki culture diffusing, like the copper mines in northern Michigan, way too big for the locals to have opened. But whether it was just Anunnaki captains and colonels who were in charge, or whether it was higher gods. As you know, there was a hierarchy,
Right.
and a ranking system. So I guess the one word answer is, yeah, they built things. I mean, what was built at the walls at Cusco, those are clearly not, you know, human, purely human engineering feats. There's no way those stones are fitted together like somebody took a knife, a warm knife to butter, you know, and we really couldn't do it today, even. You know? And some of the stones closer to home there's documentation that not only physically is it impossible to conceive of those stones being quarried and moved with muscle power, you know, and logs and ropes. In addition to that, there's also documentary support because the oral history of the Arabs is that the stones, the platform at Baalbek in the mountains of Lebanon were built by giants after the flood. And the tablets make it clear that the spaceports in Mesopotamia were rendered inoperable by the mud from the deluge. And the remaining spaceport in Sinai was operating, but it was pretty far away. And so they built one in Lebanon. Well, on to the next. You know, our understanding of the human tragedy, you know, and our apparent suicidal path. It all depends on understanding how the human beings, us, have been replicating what the Anunnaki did. Specifically, they're having deified flesh and blood living beings. Correctly referred to by the Hebrews as the false gods. Although many of the biblical age Jews, you know, did really remain attached to the gods. They had been all that made life meaningful for tens of thousands of years. You couldn't just drop it out of consciousness. And much of the complaining, the kvetching in the Bible about the false gods is really about the idols. They're false gods because they're only made of wood and stone, you know. They're not attacking the reality behind them with that language. Anyway, so, you know, we know about kings and emperors that became living gods. And most recently in Japan, that was true until 1945, you know, until MacArthur said, you can't do that anymore. But that's why the Japanese soldiers were so ferocious, because they were fighting for a god. Just like the soldiers over the centuries in Mesopotamia were fighting for their god. So it was glorious to die for your god, to kill the followers of an enemy god. Nothing was greater than that. So they were happy, in a sense. They got happy to get traumatized the way they were. So Western civilization has done pretty much the same via Christianity. And, well, yeah, we'll leave out Islam for a while, but a book that I stumbled across recently called Zealot. And it does a great job, in my mind, of differentiating Jesus of Nazareth from the Christ of Christianity. And also showing how they're related, you know. But Jesus, Yeshua in Hebrew, uh, was one of many saviors, all of whom were crucified or beheaded for sedition by the Romans. And they were the saviors were objecting to the Romans, who were continuing the worship of the olden gods in somewhat updated form, because the Roman and also the earlier Greek pantheons were modeled, on the Mesopotamian pantheon. And they were rebelling. The saviors were personifying the resistance to Roman rule, but also to the corrupt priesthood in Jerusalem, and to the loss of respect for the law, the decline in morality, the decline in following all the precepts of Moses. Now the departed self-deified gods, who have been giving guidance and meaning to humanity at a very high price, but the price was never questioned. And the worship of them was severely prohibited to the biblical Jews, although that prohibition was very, very widely violated, ignored. But how the question is like an eternal question: how to deal with corruption and decline in morals, and that's because civilized society is inherently unstable. In large part because it's not based in nature the way the indigenous societies are. In part also because they are fixed on possessions, the way the Anunnaki were. They went to war for plunder. And because they are hierarchical, and there's always a tension between the elite and the unprivileged, which is not true in indigenous life. So how to correct this tendency to disorder and chaos? And so in the West, the savior is necessary, and kings often aligning, with the religious authorities, ruling by divine right. In this country, we're seeing echoes centuries later, So when we gained independence, and formed the Constitution, there were two sides at the time that were debating how best to maintain freedom and order, because it was acknowledged that this would be hard to keep going. And they look back on the history of republics, and none of them had lasted all that long. Even the great Dutch model that was at least as important, in founding our system, as were the French and English philosophers, and the Iroquois Confederation as a model for confederation. The Dutch were just as important, and their representative democracy didn't last all that long. And Lincoln understood that that the republic was inherently unstable, And he said that was the question in the Gettysburg Address, will it last? Can, because it could vanish from the earth. Um, One of his, is a quote from him, is, must a government of necessity be too strong for the liberties of its own people, or too weak to maintain its own existence? There's a built-in dilemma. In indigenous cultures, the ultimate source is the natural life of Homo erectus, and they don't face the conundrum that we do. And if one thing that's clear to me is that if we find our way out of our dark spiral, seemingly suicidal spiral, with the knowledge of our true origins, and an understanding of the traumatization that we pass on, and the oversensitivity to shame that we pass on, and the confusion about identity that we pass on. One of the important components of our salvation will be learning from the indigenous peoples of the world who appear to be willing to help us. There are a number of instances of them really, wanting to help the crazy white guys. And how did they become so well rooted in nature? To me, for one reason or another, those who got away from the world of the Anunnaki, kind of dealing with their Homo erectus self and dealing with their Anunnaki self, decided to give greater weight to their Homo erectus self, and devised cultures, a way of life, way of surviving that were closer to their terrestrial origins. And that's, that I think that they've got to be a piece of our salvation. There's a United Nations conference, an ongoing organization of indigenous peoples from all over the world. Jane just had to go. She let me know beforehand that she had another obligation. She asked me how long I thought we would be going tonight, and I said 7:30. Because that's as much as has accumulated on my desk for the last, I think it's 2 months since we last met. We had to skip last month. I forget why.
Mike, I'm, if I may interrupt slightly, I'm thinking of the little bit that I can recall from the histories I've read of North American Indians on the West Coast, on the Northwest Coast, and with the practice of potlatch, and which was initially and for a long time, the giving away of surplus goods, an abundance of goods that a family or a clan might have, and giving them to the wider community. And that persisted for quite a while. And then at some point, I'm not sure that it correlates with the arrival of Europeans or not, but at some point it became, we might call it, somewhat perverted. And the practice went not to giving the goods, the material possessions, to other people in the community. It was demonstrating your very great status by loading them onto a canoe, shipping the canoe out to sea, and torching the whole thing. You could afford to do that. You were fantastic. And when I read that as, well, I have to say, as an anthropologist's son, I read that myself, and I didn't even have to ask my father what happened next. This is a culture that's doomed. We have a difficulty dealing with abundance of beneficial goods, whether natural or fabricated. We just have a difficulty dealing with the abundance. We become contemptuous and worse. And many indigenous societies don't usually deal with a whole lot of abundance very often.
And this may be the result of oversimplification on my part, but that transformation, within the Northwest Indians, makes me think about, somehow the white man's influence, and somehow contamination,
Yeah, but that's a little too appealing, and I want to make clear that I don't have the record on that.
Yeah, right. I know what I'd like to think, and I hope, I'd like to, know more about it. But the thing is, what I'm leading to is that there are some mixtures. There are some cultures that are primarily indigenous, but they have ingredients, they have overlay, from civilization. So some there's this mixture. Like the Hawaiians were, they were basically living off the land, living off the ocean, like and had, I think, a largely matriarchal society, but they had kings. Like, where did they get that idea?
They what?
Where did they get that idea?
Which idea is that? I couldn't hear you.
Hereditary kingship.
Oh,
And they married their half sister
yeah.
in Hawaii.
Right. So where did they get those ideas?
Well, it feels like a grab for power. Feels like.
Right. And again, and where did they get that idea? Because the grab for power is not inherent, in the indigenous worldview. If
Right.
if the chief, gets too much ego, and he's proposing things and insisting on things, that the tribe doesn't go for, one day, he wakes up early in the morning, steps out of his teepee, and he's the only one there. Everybody's gone. They voted on his legislation with their feet. So there are these somewhat confusing mixtures, because somewhere along the way, the civilized ideas and civilized tendencies, infiltrated, and then it goes the other way too. And there's hope for us. There's an online. I don't know. I don't know if it's whether national or not, but it might be. An online site, the Buy Nothing site, where people put up what they don't want, they don't need, and you make contact, and you can pick it up or they deliver it. I just was introduced. I was in the county seat of Delaware County here, media, and on the Main Street media, there's a free store. Where, it's the downscale version of the thrift shop, everything costs nothing.
Well, that's a sensible way to deal with abundance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but we're
Getting back to the potlatch, it was the Caucasian governments that outlawed the potlatch. And I had never heard the story about the burning of the goods out in the canoe. That's new to me. I think it's a horrible thought that they would do that because everything they made was handmade. It took hours and hours to make the dried food, the baskets, the hats. I just can't imagine that, especially the women that spent all that time making these things, would allow them to be burned.
Yes,
Maybe it was-
it's so long ago, my memory's faulty or fuzzy. I cannot say how the record that I read of it was how long that perverted, I'll call it the perverted practice, was sustained. Was it more? My memory, it was more than one time, but it happened. But how long did it happen? I don't know.
Yeah, and if that followed the outlawing of the genuine potlatch, it
Yeah.
could be understood as a stick in the eye of the white guys.
But then they turned it into Christmas.
Yeah.
They called it Christmas, and then that was okay to give presents to everybody.
Oh, okay. Well, that was part of the missionary thing.
Mhm.
That's kind of different.
It gets
I
messy.
think there's a problem with abundance. That's my guess. I'm putting that forward. We have a constant problem with abundance.
I guess, I think we've had a bigger problem with scarcity, but could be. Mhm. Well, I'm hoping that by the next time we meet, the first Monday in June, I hope I'll have some positive news about the movie, the hybrids moving forward, resuming its progress. My own, the way this whole thing, the whole enterprise that came about is so clearly divinely guided and encouraged, that I just can't believe that the universe, the one, provides this kind of gift, provides this opportunity to deliver its message to the collective, that keeps it going like that, and then just drops it. Fooled you, I don't think it works that way. That's my belief. So I'm not making any assumptions. I'm just looking forward to the next step, and it could be that the person he or she or it that wants to take over this project, this wonderful guy, well loved in Hollywood, which is a rarity, what he was passionate about when he passed, and his passion, by the way, goes back to him being a Sitchinite. That's why he wanted to see the screenplay that I've been developing with a friend, because he read all the books also. Actually, I wrote him into the movie in a character. There's somebody who read all the books. So I hope I'll have some news for you in a positive way. Well, we may have to wait another month before our next facilitator. But it could very well be, let this be from my mouth to God's ear, it could very well be that who steps in next has even more connections than this guy who passed, David who passed. Could be. And he had plenty. He was about to use them all. Maybe, you know, I mean, he was not well, and he had evaded the angel of death about 4 or 5 times. So couldn't do it this last time. But it could be that, you know, that he steps aside in order to allow someone else to step in. We'll see. It's an unfolding mystery. The big mystery just keeps going on. Thank you all for joining in.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you, Mike.
hope to be with you all and maybe even some more folks. There's an enthusiast out in Santa Fe that I've heard from, and there's this scientist and
Did you knock on the door?
scientist at Villanova. Surprising, she has an understanding that the octopus is an extraterrestrial. It's like,
That was on one of the Ancient Alien shows.
oh, that's an interesting thought. So, well, you know,
They have bigger brains than we do.
that's somebody to have in our crew. Okay, more later.
Thank you very much. It was informative.
Do.
Blessings
Good
all.
night.
Good night for now.
Right.
See you soon.